Aloha, happy Friday. This is Kaui Lucas with Hawaii is My Mainland on Think Tech Hawaii. This week I have two astonishingly knowledgeable guests. They are Ernest WWII Lau. I always mess up on that, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Who's the manager and chief engineer of the Honolulu Board of Water Supply,
Hi.
and Erwin Kawata, Program Administrator, Water Quality Division, also from the Honolulu Board of Water Supply. And this, I titled this the Leaky Red Hill Tanks 1.3 because originally Marty Townsend was on this show, and she talked about it, and I said, what? You mean that isn't fixed yet? And she says, well, you need to talk to Ernie Lau. And then Laura Thielen happened to be already scheduled to come on the show, and she talked about it. So we've had a little background, and people can always go to kauilucas.com and look up those shows. But now we have the head cheeses here. I'm so thankful for you to come and try to explain this really complicated situation. So, any opening remarks?
Well, I'm Ernie, a manager and chief engineer for the Board of Water Supply. So, mahalo Kaui for allowing us to be here today. We look forward for these opportunities to educate our community about some very important water issues. And to my left is Erwin Kawata.
Hello, Kaui. Yes.
Hi. So these two gentlemen took an hour and a half last week to try and educate me about this. And I didn't cry, and I didn't say anything really profane, but it was in my mind. And I have been losing sleep, but it's all good. It's all good because I'm learning. We all need to just learn. We just need to learn what's going on. So to try to break this down in bite-sized pieces, you have provided me with some really excellent materials, and they are all available. And the follow-up blog will have that, and you have it on your website. Yes. So, you know, if somebody doesn't see it right this minute, they can go back and look. But let's see the first, there we go. And Erwin, are you gonna talk about this?
Sure. What you're seeing here is a picture of where the Red Hill tank is located, or facility is located. It's bordered by that red line, which is the property boundary. And around it has 5 of the Board of Water Supply's pumping stations. The most major one is the one called Halawa Shaft to the northwest, over there almost to the center of the picture. That water source combined with the one to the south called Moanalua Wells, closer to the bottom of the page. Those two particular water sources provide 25% of the water that serves our metropolitan Honolulu system, which spans from Moanalua Valley all the way out to Hawaii Kai. And they are also the 2 wells that are closest to the facility and of major concern to us.
So as we're looking at this map, there are these numbers, 0.6 million gallons a day.
Sure.
6 to 12 million gallons a day. So is that how much is pumped from those particular wells?
That's correct. That's correct, Kaui. The numbers there shown there is the amount of water each one of those particular wells serve every day. And so you can see for Halawa Shaft, we have 12 million gallons. That's a very large water source in comparison to the other ones. But they all are serving either our metro system or provide regional water supply to our distribution.
Okay, and then under this facility is something called an aquifer.
That's correct. The groundwater aquifer sits right below the entire field facility there at Red Hill, the Navy's field facility. Just about 100 feet above the top of the water table, from the bottom of the fuel tanks. That's all the space that separates the fuel from the drinking water supply.
Okay, then the Navy's field facility, so we saw that red line, and is that what you're referring to, or does it extend beyond that?
Yeah, actually the red line delineates the property upon which the field facility sits, or the parcel. The black dots there are actually 2 rows of 10 tanks each that is located underground, that was constructed in place during the Second World War. So this whole facility, what we're saying, actually lies right over the drinking water aquifer.
How far, where does that aquifer extend to? Ernie?
This aquifer this facility actually sits on the boundary between the Moanalua Aquifer system and our Waimalu Aquifer system. The Moanalua Aquifer system is part of the Honolulu Aquifer, which starts as far as WWII area and runs all the way to this Red Hill area.
So are you telling me that that's all interconnected?
It is all what we call, I'm really sorry, this is the engineer. Hydraulically connected, and one way to explain is the aquifer, the water in the aquifer actually saturates the lava rock that's below our island. Lava rock ends up being like a sponge, and by connected we mean that a drop of water from Mauna Loa can migrate and flow into the Waimalu Aquifer system. So it's connected so water can actually flow between the two systems.
And it flows through the rocks.
And it flows through the rocks. We are really blessed in Hawaii. Our geology, especially here in Oahu, is very porous, and it allows water to flow pretty easily and rapidly across these through the rock itself.
And so these wells that you pointed out, those are where there are actual Board of Water Supply pumping stations that are feeding our basic Board of Water Supply system.
Right.
Okay.
The wells that Erwin described earlier, the 5 wells that are both to the north of the field facility and to the south, are actually pumping wells that supply drinking water. They're connected to pipelines that actually provide water to our customers in the area, and all the way, actually, some of the water actually can reach as far as East Honolulu. I'd like to point out too that the Navy is also tapping the same aquifer with their own drinking water source called the Navy Water Well or Red Hill Shaft, and it provides about 24% of Joint Base Pearl Harbor HICM's water demands.
Wow. Do you have any idea what that population is?
I don't have any idea how many military personnel and dependents are actually living on the space, but it is a fairly large area. And you can see that Red Hill Shaft is almost the equivalent size of our Halava Shaft. Mm-hmm. Both were built about the same time during the 40s, and both are very important water resources to both the BWS, Board of Water Supply, and also the Navy.
Let's have a look at the structure of this facility and the tanks. Zuri, if we could go to the next one, the photo map. Okay, and she fixed it. Oh, right. Thanks, Zuri. All right, so what are we looking at now?
Well, this is a 3-dimensional picture showing the tanks. There are 20 tanks total. There are in 2 rows of 10. They are each 250 feet high and 100 feet in diameter. And can hold 12.5 million gallons of fuel in each one of the tanks. The tanks were built between 1940 and 43, and they basically store fuel. The tanks are connected by what is called service tunnels. There's an upper and lower, and the lower one there at the bottom of the picture is where it contains the pipelines that move the fuel to and from Pearl Harbor. It can move the fuel from Pearl Harbor up to the tanks and stored, and then the fuel can then be flowed gravity down through the pipeline back to Pearl Harbor.
So I can see why during World War II this was a very, very important facility. I mean, you could get from Pearl Harbor to hidden in the mountains,
Yeah, that's true.
all underground.
It's all underground.
It would have been protected from attack. So the construction started in 1940 and continued in 1943. And it only stopped, I believe, the day that Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7th.
The construction part.
Right.
Wow. Okay, I could go on the history part of this for days, but let's go back to what are these tanks? How are they constructed, and how do they, they're holding different kinds of fuel, right? We have some jet fuel and...
That's correct.
And diesel.
And diesel.
Yes.
Okay, and they're in use. Correct?
15 of the 20, as far as we know, 15 of the 20 tanks are actually in use.
Okay.
These are basically concrete tanks with a thin steel liner on the inside that is actually the thin membrane that keeps the fuel from leaking out into the environment. So it's a concrete tank with a steel liner. The walls are constructed of 1/4-inch steel plate welded together, and the top and bottom dome of the tank are a half-inch thick.
So this quarter-inch steel, is it from 1940?
Yes, it was actually between 1940, like I mentioned earlier, 1940 to 43, they constructed this massive underground facility secretly, and this is the original steel plate that was put there over 73 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's have a look at what that looks like. There we go.
Erwin?
I had to think of the Star Wars movies, I have to say, when I saw this.
Well, what you're actually looking at is that as I said, the tank is 250 feet high, and at the 200-foot level, there's an access portal. And you can actually open up the access portal and walk onto that walkway there. You can install the walkway. And that's how the servicing or work on the tank gets done. And from that walkway, you can actually look down, and these tanks are large enough or tall enough where you can actually put Aloha Tower in them. So that kind of gives you a sense as to how large these are. And to get a sense of what it looks like, you can actually walk out into that platform and you look down. It's almost like going to the top of the Ala Moana building or the edge of the Ala Moana Hotel and actually looking down. That gives you a sense of how high these tanks are.
Have you guys been in them?
We've been in them a number of times. If you're afraid of heights, walking on this old steel plank there out the walkway, and you're right over the middle of the tank near the very top, looking down, it's a little scary. It's a long way down.
What's it smell like in there?
As soon as you enter the upper access tunnel or the lower access tunnel, because they store fuel there, you can smell the fuel itself.
You can.
Sometimes it's a little stronger, sometimes it isn't. They do have a ventilation system in operation to try to bring fresh air into the tunnel.
And any other, when we saw that picture, it was like, so can you see what the surface of that metal is like?
Only on the inside.
On the inside.
Because the tanks are encased in concrete that occupies that space between the steel and the rock excavation, there's no way to really easily see the condition of the outside of that steel plate. So look at the inside, you can see some corrosion going on.
You can see it? Did you see it?
We saw a little bit of surface rust there, and you can see in this picture here some of the images of surface rust on the steel plate itself. This is actually tank number 19, but it's been out of use for a while now.
Okay, well, let's take a little pause here and come back with more about the Red Hill fuel tanks.
Aloha, namaskar, and hello. My name is Anu Hittel, and I host a show, Climate Change Beyond Outrage. In it, we go beyond outrage to look at solutions to climate problems facing people, nations, and the world. Join me every Tuesday at 1 o'clock Hawaii Standard Time. See you then.
Aloha! Hello, my name is Patrick Bratton. I'm host of Global Connections here at ThinkTech Hawaii. We broadcast live every Thursday at 1 p.m. We bring Hawaii to the world and the world to Hawaii, talking about international events and various things of interest to the audience. Please join me. I look forward to talking with you and having you get to meet some of my guests. Aloha.
Aloha, this is Maria Mera, and I'm here to invite you to my bilingual show, Viva Hawaii on ThinkTech Hawaii, every other Monday at 3 p.m. We're here to inform, motivate, and entertain you. Join us. Hola, soy María Mera y estoy aquí para invitaros a mi show bilingüe, Viva Hawaii en ThinkTech Hawaii, cada 2 lunes a las 3 de la tarde. Estamos aquí para informaros, motivaros y entreteneros. Apuntaros.
Welcome back to Hawaii is My Mainland on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm Kaui Lucas, and with me today is Erwin Kawata, who deals with the water quality at Board of Water Supply, and Ernest Lau, who is the Chief Engineer and Manager.
Thank you.
And we talked about the actual site at Halawa, at Red Hill, what the facility and the tanks are like. And now we're going to get into what's been happening as far as the leaks and the contamination. So Erwin, let's have you talk about some of this.
Well, to start, the Navy has done a number of studies. They were doing a number of studies since as far back as the late 1990s. And we've had a chance to take a look at what these studies show. And they show that there is evidence of petroleum chemicals underground within the rocks and in the groundwater underneath the tanks. It also shows that leaks has been occurring as far back as 1947. And so the chart that, so these leaks are varied, but they do show that they were going on from 1947 up until the mid-'80s as far as the study and the records that would show. And it also shows that continually there is this groundwater contamination and from information and data that was doing as far back as the year 2005.
So the study went from the 40s to the 80s and showed intermittent.
It showed leaks occurring intermittent from just about every one of the tanks. The amount of leaks varied from very small numbers to very somewhat moderate to larger numbers. In totality, there's quite a number. If you total up all of the numbers together, they come up to a very sizable number, and several 100,000 gallons total, occurring from, say, 1947 up until the mid-'80s.
So what was the process then of dealing with these leaks? What happened with the,
Well, it's unclear as to the process and but the level of record keeping and why the records were kept. I think from what we can tell, the Navy needed to manage or be able to keep track of to how much fuel was going into the tanks, how much was being removed. They did maintenance work on it, and also they were finding out that through that process that leaks were occurring. That's what we're basically finding, that there was releases.
Okay, and let's go to that, the next one, the monitor of well 2.
Yeah, what you're seeing here is actually a graph. Like I said, the Navy installed these test wells to look at, is there any kind of petroleum contamination in the groundwater underneath the tanks? And this is showing from 2005 up until the present day.
Did they start in 2005?
It was actually started in 2005, actually, as far as testing the groundwater, according to the studies that we've reviewed. They were done from 2005 up to the present, where they installed these test wells, and tests were done on the amount of petroleum contamination that was present. And what you're seeing here is this is for a test well called monitor well number 2. And the lines there is showing the amount of petroleum that was detected in the groundwater samples as a function of time. So the bottom axis is time in dates, and the axis going vertically to your left is the amount of contamination. And you can see there are periods where you have high amounts and very low amounts. Now, there are 3 peaks there, first, second, and third. The middle peak there is the amount of detection detected after the leak was reported from tank number 5 in January of 2014. And so we know that that increase in the amount of detection or contamination that was detected came from that leak. The other 2 peaks on the side of it, to the left and to the right of it, we don't know what the reason for that was, but it did indicate that there was a period or time period where there was a very large amount of petroleum contamination detected in this particular monitor well.
Can you talk about the green line at the bottom?
The green line at the bottom is actually the Department of Health's Environmental Action Limit, or EAL, for drinking water. And what they've indicated is that any kind of petroleum detection above that number is a reason for concern, and is a reason that should cause for more study and probably try to clean up or mitigate the situation, because groundwater is always moving. And this is testing the groundwater underneath the tanks. But as you know, groundwater, because it's moving, it can take the contamination and move it to other parts of the aquifer that is currently not contaminated. So
all of those data points, there were the little green triangles. You've done this work, but you weren't collecting the data. This was all
No.
supplied by the Navy. And
Right.
it looked like at no point in all of this was it below the green line. Is that true?
That's true for that particular monitor well that we were looking at.
Okay.
And they have several. They have about 10 different monitor wells, and they're all showing different kinds of levels. Some
Okay,
have
so-
very high and some very low.
So maybe we should go to
That's a
the
good
graphic,
segue.
to the next one, the inside tunnel monitor well?
There are two sets of monitor wells. One set is the wells that are along the lower access tunnel, and that's the monitor wells closest to the tanks. And this picture here is what's showing for as far as the types of petroleum-related chemicals and the amounts that have been detected in these monitor wells. And this particular drawing is showing for as of April of 2015. So this is for the inside. And the one there is that they're also testing their own drinking
That's
water
1
well.
year ago.
That's 1 year ago, correct.
Right.
Just
And-
checking.
It is
And-
1 year ago.
And one of the monitoring sites or testing sites is their own drinking water well, labeled with the blue label there. And they are also detecting low levels of petroleum-type chemicals in their own drinking water well.
I think this is a good time to make a point for the Board of Water Supply wells, the 5 wells that are closest to this facility. Since we learned about it in January 2014, we've been testing also for a lot of petroleum-related contaminants, and we have not, at this time, detected any contaminants in our drinking water. So that's a plus right now.
Yes.
So it says that the fuel contamination hasn't yet reached us, but our concern over the long term, because groundwater moves and we are pumping, can we actually draw the contaminants toward our wells, and will we eventually get it into our drinking water wells? But we're testing every quarter, like the Navy, and at this point, what you saw in those test results on the previous graph, we're not getting those results in our drinking water. It's all non-detect.
So only the Navy's drinking water is being,
Yeah, they're showing some low levels there, still below the EPA's maximum contaminant levels for drinking. But I think the important thing is that they are showing some petroleum contaminants in their drinking water.
so that means that somehow it is getting from the tanks or,
And that's the question. I think that's, in review of the numerous studies that the Navy's done, it seems like that's one of their big concerns. Remember, that drinking water source provides 24% of Joint Base Pearl Harbor HICM's water demands. So their concern is, will their drinking water source get affected by this, by the fuel facility?
well, it's nice to know they have some skin in the game too.
Yeah, they need the
I'm
water
sorry.
too.
All right, let's look at the contaminated groundwater 500 feet. I
Yeah,
apologize.
this drawing shows, so the last one we looked at, what kind of groundwater contamination is very close to the tanks. This one is showing, is there contamination away from the tanks? And it's actually, in these test wells, it's actually showing detectable, measurable levels of petroleum-related types of chemicals as much as 1,000 feet away, as far as 1,000 feet away. And this goes back to the issue that because groundwater is moving, it can move with, contamination can be moving in the groundwater, and we can see here that there is actual detection going on. So
Is this new?
this is not new. This is all part of the Navy's data that they've been collecting since 2005. And all I did was just get the data and put it on a chart.
Okay, so let's see what that looks like with the core samples. What does it look like physically to take those?
Yeah, in the late 1990s, the Navy also went ahead and took some core samples of the rock under each of the tanks. This is core samples of the rock under each of the tanks, and 19 of the 20 samples, there are 20 tanks, 19 of them showed staining. The black is the petroleum staining, and that's inside a rock. And the rock is actually supposed to look somewhat opaque white, but they were all stained black, and there were reports that when they pulled out the core, there was actually some petroleum actually seeping out of the rock. And so it's evidence, or it's showing that that there is some kind of leak going on, and the rocks are absorbing all the fuel that's leaking from the tanks.
Okay, and I just want to repeat that you said earlier that of the 20 tanks, 15 are currently
In use.
Right.
And they have fuel in them all the time.
All the time.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So I know that, you know, if somebody wants to decommission a service station, for instance, or something like that, there's quite a process for mitigation and so forth. Is there any work being done as far as brownfield?
As far as we know, for the fuel tanks itself, all they're doing is monitoring, sampling the groundwater, looking at the vapor below the tanks, the petroleum vapor levels below the tanks, and they're just gathering information. They haven't yet gone to try to remediate or remove the contamination from the ground or the rock or the water. There was a site that was part of this facility called the Oily Waste Disposal Site, and that was in the past considered a Superfund site for cleanup. It's where they used to clean these tanks out because originally it contained a variety of fuels, including oil that powered ships, like a bunker fuel. Also motor gasoline, leaded gas, aviation gas, in addition to the jet fuel and the diesel for ships. So they periodically would clean out the tanks, and they used to dump some of that material into an open hole dug in the ground nearby called the Oily Waste Disposal Site.
And of course, that was lined with impermeable.
Unfortunately, you know, the environmental regulations of today are not always what used to be in place in the 40s. And it was basically a bare open hole, bare earth.
Okay, well, let's take a minute and digest that, shall we?
Aloha, my name is Justine Espiritu, and I am the co-host of Hawaii Farmers Series. This is my co-host, Matthew Johnson, and we are live with you every Thursday at 4 p.m. at thinktechhawaii.com. And our show focuses on Hawaii's local food community. We feature not only the farmers that are producing our food, but we also feature the supporters and other folks involved in the community that are trying to promote local agriculture.
Aloha! How you doing? It's me, Angus McTech, wishing you to welcome and join us to see us on Hibachi Talk on Think Tech Hawaii. Join my co-hosts, Gordo the Tech Czar and Andrew the Security Guy, every Friday from 1300 to 1345. We look forward to seeing you. We'll talk tech and we'll have some wee bit of fun. And remember, let your wing gang free wherever you be. Aloha!
Welcome back to Hawaii is My Mainland. I'm Kaui Lucas. Hawaii is My Mainland is here every Friday at 3 p.m. on Think Tech Hawaii, and then it's on YouTube, so it's always available. Today we have two gentlemen from the Board of Water Supply, and we're discussing the infamous Red Hill fuel tanks. And I'm still in shock about this open pit thing. But Ernie, why don't you talk about the current situation? Well, actually, I guess, Erwin, this is still your bailiwick here, the tank repairs and usage and testing.
I think through our research, what we've come across is back in 2010, the Navy actually did an audit of the Red Hill fuel facility, and in that audit, it validated that there was that they found groundwater contamination based on the information that was being collected, but they also discovered that there wasn't much maintenance going on. And this table here shows is a summary that came out of the Navy audit report that shows that many of these tanks hadn't gone and hadn't been done any maintenance for extremely long periods of time, as much as 46 or so plus years. So that's one of the findings of the audit. The audit also documented the rusting of the tanks that are going on. It documented pictures of large areas where corrosion or rusting were taking place and that they needed to replace these plates to correct the rust. And this picture here is what you're showing came out directly out of the audit report, illustrating and validating the concerns about corrosion that can be happening or rusting that can happen, causing pinholes or places where fuel can leak past the liner and into the environment.
So we talked about it's a 1/4 inch of steel,
Right.
and then it's some amount of concrete, which we know is a porous material.
Right.
And then it's
Rocks.
our beloved Aina.
Our basalt rock or lava rock.
Right.
Okay, which is all sitting on 100 feet on top of
Above
our
drinking water.
aquifer. So the tagline for Hawaii is my mainland is native perspectives from Earth's most isolated archipelago. And so you were saying why this is really of grave concern for the Honolulu Board of Water Supply, and let's explore that. Where are we?
So for the Board of Water Supply, our responsibility is to provide drinking water to our community, not only for today, but also into the future, basically forever, as long as there are people here. And that source of drinking water is really from groundwater. We are blessed on this island, even though we're surrounded by salt water, with rain that drops on the Ko'olau and Waianae mountains. And that helps to recharge these aquifers with fresh water, pure drinking water. Unfortunately, in this location, there is a large amount of petroleum stored directly over this resource that back in the 80s was designated by the US EPA, recognized as a sole source aquifer, providing over 50% of the island's water needs and really can't be replaced. So
No, just say that again.
Okay, well, I didn't share this with you earlier, but back in the 80s when the EPA created this program called the Sole Source Aquifer Program, there was a petition made to designate the Honolulu and Pearl Harbor aquifers on Oahu as sole source aquifers. And the EPA did recognize them as sole source aquifers back as far as the 80s. I think it basically is a recognition by the US EPA of the importance of this groundwater resource for us. So our concern at Red Hill, the large amount of fuel in a right now, a 73-year-old facility that's aging, with the original steel plate basically keeping the fuel in these tanks, and with about 3 miles of oil pipelines that connected to Pearl Harbor. Our concern is that someday there could be larger, even more catastrophic fuel releases that'll release large amounts of fuel into the ground that'll eventually seep into the water below the groundwater aquifer. And could that migrate and spread in either direction, to the north or south?
So I remember you talked about one of the beauties of this facility was that they're up in this hill and they're protected inside the mountain. And so they, once the Navy pumps the fuel up, it's great because there's a gravity feed, right?
Gravity feed back to Pearl Harbor.
Back to Pearl Harbor through these tunnels, I didn't have the pictures of them, but just so that people understand how the mechanism for transferring these fuels happens. And
So it starts at Pearl Harbor when they bring the fuel into Pearl Harbor on ships or barges. And then there's a pumping station near Pearl Harbor, near the water, that pumps the fuel through over 3 miles of pipelines into these tanks at a higher elevation under the ridge there at Red Hill. And then when they need that fuel, even if electricity were to go out, and this is what the Navy explains, they could still supply ships that might need the fuel out of those tanks by simply opening up valves and allowing the fuel to flow freely by gravity back to Pearl Harbor. But that also poses a potential risk because the large size of these tanks, if it were to develop leaks, it takes them days to try to move that fuel to another empty tank or to move it to a ship at Pearl Harbor.
it takes days to
I
physically
think I recall tank number 5 took maybe 5 days to move the fuel out of it or so. Because remember, it's 12.5 million gallons of fuel in each of those tanks, and there are 15 in operation right now.
15 in operation. Well, I feel so much better that it's not 20. So theoretically, we have one more, the map of Oahu, sorry. So, you know, maybe it's, okay, so the EPA says it's a sole source, but looking at your map, you know, there are other sources. Just say that something terrible happened, like you know, an earthquake or something, and the tanks leaked, and we can't use that water. Is there enough water available?
We would have to determine, okay, how much water, how many wells are impacted. We'd have to reduce the amount of pumping from them or shut them off completely until we can put treatment systems in place to remove the fuel contamination. So that depends on also probably the size of the leak, if the leak is into the millions of gallons into the groundwater, and how far and how rapidly it'll travel. So what we have with the Board of Water Supply, very fortunately, we do have a highly interconnected system, except for some systems like in Central Oahu, North Shore, Kahuku area, that we can try to move water from different sources, different well stations to other locations. We have about 90 well stations around the island and 2,100 miles of pipeline. So that's probably our short-term immediate actions. Given the report of a large leak, we'd probably shut down some of these nearby wells as a precaution, which is exactly what we did back in January 2014.
Okay, so you said something that made me feel sort of hopeful. You said you would shut them down until it was cleaned up. So you can clean up an aquifer?
That's a big question, depending on how much fuel gets into. Remember, it's not going to be in a large cavern underground. It's going to be fuel that's trapped in the crevices and cracks of the lava rock, and in the water itself. So our ability, how effective can the Navy remove that fuel from the lava rock itself, and over what time frame? I have a little bit of a personal experience with fuel leaks. My uncle, which I used to spend my summers working on, used to have a lo'i before, and but his lo'i got contaminated with fuel that leaked from a gas station a few thousand feet located in Mauka of his lo'i.
What part of the island was that?
It was at Pearl Ridge, yeah, and I remember it took years before the seeping fuel, the levels dropped, and they had to install a ditch to capture that fuel before it got into the lo'i. But you could walk near that ditch and you could smell fuel. And this is fuel flowing with the groundwater. And one thing is important is that groundwater typically on Oahu will flow from Mauka to Makai, from the mountains, the ridges toward the ocean. So, and our concern is, can it flow also across a Halava Valley toward our Halava Shaft? Ultimately, the question I have in mind, I don't know the answer. Will this fuel, if it leaks underground, end up in the coastal waters of Pearl Harbor, which is probably the nearest saltwater water body nearby?
Okay, so let's go back to that lo'i for a minute.
It's a little personal story there.
I love it. I was working with Kako'o Iwi, who has a lo'i, 300 acres on the other side. I'm just like so overwhelmed. So we had a problem because the runoff from Kamehameha Highway had seeped in to the lo'i there, and I thought, wow, gosh, you wouldn't think, runoff from a road would have detectable levels in such that it would impact the water quality enough for agriculture. But you are saying that it lasted for years at this.
And that was just a very small example, a small gas station there at Pearl Ridge. I won't name the name of the company, but their underground fuel storage tanks for that gas station had a leak, and they lost, I don't know how many thousand gallons of fuel. But at Red Hill, think about it, the amount of fuel stored at Red Hill compared to your corner gas station is way larger. There's right now, with 15 tanks in operation, something on the order of 187 million gallons of fuel stored there at Red Hill. This is why we're very concerned about this situation. And WWS believes that we want to encourage the Navy to take preventative actions if they're going to continue to use that fuel facility, to do appropriate major upgrades to that facility. For example, like a tank within a tank, a new tank built within the old tanks, double-walled tanks, to prevent future leakage.
Okay, prevent future leakage. We will thank you so much, both of you, for agreeing to come back next week, because there's a lot more to cover. There's a lot we didn't even get into, so we won't, I'm explaining to viewers why we didn't get more solution-oriented or didn't talk about the agreement that has been worked out, and there are a couple of bills in the legislature currently that are addressing this, and maybe we'll know more by next week. But as far as the situation here and now in Honolulu, do you feel like the Board of Water Supply has adequate information to know what is happening at Red Hill?
No. We feel that there is probably a bigger story to tell, and that there's more information that could be obtained. There is the important need to actually drill more test wells or monitor wells. These are not wells that supply drinking water, but these are wells that provide the ability to test the water beneath the ground to see if there's fuel contamination. That's what we call site characterization. More of that work needs to be done, and we're committed to continue to press the Navy, the DOH, and the EPA to be more aggressive on this issue at Red Hill.
Okay, but we saw from earlier graphs that we saw the core samples. There is contamination.
I think it's pretty undeniable. The core sample says 19 of the 20 tanks have leaked, at least up to that point when they drilled those cores.
Okay, so thank goodness you're going to be back again next Friday here at 3 p.m.
Thank you.
to explain this a little more.
Sure.
Erwin and Ernie, thank you so much for taking the time to really explain the ins and outs of this situation with the Red Hill fuel tanks.
Mahalo.
Thank you.